Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Black, Brown, Bruised. How Racialized STEM Education Stifles Innovation. By Ebony Omotola McGee. Foreword by David Omotoso Stovall. Narrated by Diana Blue. Publisher's Note. In this audio edition, you will hear references to visual elements present in the print and ebook formats of the book. The idea of being able to do something I love and help others realize their dreams, it's the perfect solution for me. The perfect dream. Ashanti Johnson, geochemist and chemical oceanographer. The way to approach it, the topic of race, I think, is not to ask, what would it be like to be black? But to seriously consider what it is like to be white. That's something white people almost never think about. And what it is like to be white is not to say, we have to level the playing field, but to acknowledge that not only do white people own the playing field, but they have so designated this plot of land as a playing field to begin with. White people are the playing field. The advantage of being white is so extreme, so overwhelming, that to use the word advantage at all is misleading, since it implies a kind of parity that simply does not exist. Fran Lebowitz. Don't let anyone rob you of your imagination, your creativity, or your curiosity. It's your place in the world. It's your life. Go on and do all you can with it, and make it the life you want to live. Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman astronaut in space. Foreword. A treatise for the punished pushed to an imminent rebellion. Dr. Ebony Omotola McGee has charged me with the responsibility of offering some opening words. In response to her call, I am reminded of the work of critical science educator, researcher, and scholar Daniel Morales Doyle, in that we rarely take into account the idea that mainstream white society still maintains its hold on who is allowed to be a scientist. By the time a Black or Latinx youth reaches second grade and expresses an interest in science, we cut their dreams short and write it off as impossible given their conditions: structural racism, poverty, low test scores, disinvested schools, etc. When we think of the preparation, study, and commitment to trial and error required to engage for inquiry into the natural, physical, and medical sciences, rarely do we think of Black and Latinx youth as potentially having the solutions to address their conditions. In worst-case scenarios, scholars Nicole Wynn, Sepper Vakil, and Sharon Vosky inform us on how STEM, in some instances, is utilized to usher students of color, particularly those from historically marginalized and isolated communities, into the war economy by way of the military-industrial complex. As science is weaponized to combat concerns like international terrorism via Homeland Security institutes at the high school level, the same technologies are used domestically on Black and Latinx communities to justify surveillance and occupation. That is, war or drugs, war on crime, war on gangs, etc. Again, Black and brown folks are asked to produce and or justify the same violent mechanisms that are used against them in the name of science. To some, STEM or STEAM A is added for art to the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics moniker for good measure, has solidified itself as yet another tool by which to sort the have-nots from the chosen. I am pleased to state that the offering, Black, Brown, Bruised, How Racialized STEM Education Stifles Innovation, seeks to challenge the aforementioned realities. Where some may think my comments to be a harsh and unfair critique of STEM or STEAM, I remind them that my writing of this document takes place during a global health pandemic. The novel coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, has spread across countries and continents, exposing those who have historically been deemed disposable to the worst of its wrath. This moment is not only timely and relevant to Black, Brown, Bruised currently, but will remain salient for the foreseeable future for the following reasons. First, this moment has laid bare societal disparities along the lines of race, class, gender, age, disability, and sexual orientation that have existed for time immemorial. Second, and into the distant future, STEM education will make a pivot to pay specific attention to the prevention and containment of pandemics, prioritizing disciplines that engage environmental and medical sciences. As Black, Brown, Bruised dares to propose suggestions on how to address the prevalence of white supremacy in STEM-related education in colleges and universities, it is also providing a roadmap to open the gates to those who potentially have the answers for some of humanity's most pressing concerns. Given Dr. McGee's dedication to poignantly illuminate the totalizing power of white supremacy in STEM education, the assumed views and values of white, Western European descended, cisgender, heterosexual, Protestant, able-bodied males as normal, right, and good, while othering everything else, white supremacy, are challenged explicitly. If we understand white supremacy as one of the baseline realities in STEM education, it becomes easier to embrace radical imaginaries like those of Dr. McGee that push us to work with others to change the current condition. I have to admit, I envision many hearing the previous paragraph and saying, why can't we just have a conversation about the promise and possibility of STEM? To their question, I would reply, it is impossible to talk about any possibility of STEM in the current moment and for the long haul without an explicit acknowledgement of the totalizing power of white supremacy. Currently, in Chicago, almost 70% of deaths from COVID-19 have been Black folks. As schools have been forced to shutter their doors, many have limited or no access to reliable Wi-Fi networks, computers, or tablets. Before the shelter-in-place orders issued by local and state governments, 60% of young people in Chicago public schools, CPS, accessed the internet via their phones. These are the people who are structurally marginalized from STEM education. Dr. McGee, as a Chicago Southsider herself, understands these realities while revealing the consequences of not valuing Black, Brown, and Indigenous minds and bodies. Black, Brown, Bruised is fearless in its understanding of these realities while uplifting the necessity of prioritizing the needs of people who come from these conditions who are entering STEM fields in colleges and universities. Years ago, I would ask my high school students in the beginning of the year if they had ever been punished for not reading or doing math well. It would always surprise me how many of my students answered yes. Reflecting on it now, I realized that I was really asking them to confirm my own trauma given my struggles with math. I can remember dismissing myself as not good at math and isolating myself, refusing to engage in math-centered activities. When I got to high school, I was surprised by what was expected of me in my math classes. As I started to talk to my classmates, I began to realize that the things I was doing in 8th grade math were done by my classmates in their 4th and 5th grade classes. Because I didn't conceptualize the fact that they had a different set of resources regarding math instruction, I just wrote it off as them being smarter than me. Instead, it confirms the fact that this has never been an aptitude issue as much as it is a resource issue. Pushing us forward, Black, Brown, Bruised challenges us to entertain the questions STEM for what? STEM for whom? How can the skills learned in STEM programming be used to develop tangible mechanisms for changing the conditions of my community and the people I care about? In the end, I think science will be appreciative of these subjective questions. We have come to grips with the fact that we still ask young people to suffer through their university experiences in STEM education with the hope that they won't ask deeper questions of its relevance and utility. Science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics might present an avenue to rupture the orthodoxy of white supremacy in STEM, but it will only do so if paired with critical analysis and fugitive planning. Black, Brown, Bruised digs deeper into the challenge of making sure that the justice-minded Black, Latinx, and Indigenous scholars have a way to build what we need. The current state of affairs, before and after the pandemic, remains unacceptable. I know that more orthodoxy won't give us the answers we need. Instead, we need to consider whether or not STEM, STEAM, or any iteration has the power to shift the paradigm. As disruptive work, I understand Black, Brown, Bruised to operate in the spirit of Katherine Johnson, Ellen Ochoa, and Susan LaFleche-Picotte. Because Dr. McGee has dared to be unpopular and has named the devil in the room concerning the exclusion of Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks in the physical, natural, and medical sciences, engineering, technology, and mathematics, it is important that we support her fugitive and revolutionary praxis. Given the responsibility placed on me by Dr. McGee, it is my humble prayer that these words reflect solidarity with her efforts. David Amatoso Stovall, Ph.D., Chicago, April 22, 2020. Introduction. The URM, Student Experience in STEM. For years, I have asked my research participants what it means to be Black or Latinx as they study science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM. Although it is useful to investigate why these underrepresented, racially minoritized URM students do not find success in STEM majors, I have concentrated on understanding those who do academically succeed. Studying and problematizing traditional notions of academic success enables a deep appreciation of what it means for students of color to be academically successful in places where their numbers are few and negative beliefs about their ability prevail. As Black, Indigenous, and Latinx students brave the chilly waters of white-dominated STEM universities, certain experiences crop up regularly. Isolation, feeling or being positioned as an imposter, and racial stereotypes and other forms of racialized bias that distract URM students from their studies and sap their energy. These URM students find it hard to establish relationships with faculty who do not share their racial identity, or maybe it's vice versa. Their advisors are usually white or Asian and do not understand what the students are going through. Many URM students do not have mentors and are not privy to understanding the full benefit from receiving support from a mentor or how to find a mentor. Without these faculty advocates, they face limited learning opportunities and miss out on academic programs such as studying abroad and tuition-paid research assistant positions. Faculty and peers can be covertly or openly racist, engaging in discriminatory, passive-aggressive behavior, and stereotyping. As a result, URM students cope with outsized stress that has psychological, physical, and academic effects, and they drop out of STEM programs at higher rates than their white and Asian counterparts. Intersectional issues, such as those experienced by a Black trans woman or a gay, Indigenous wheelchair user, heighten all these difficulties, often adding misogynistic and anti-LGBTQ+ and anti-disability discrimination to their race-based barriers. In this book, I clarify how the path to success for all URM students remains challenging, even for those at the top of the STEM academic ladder, and, surprisingly, even at historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and Hispanic-serving institutions, HSIs. URM doctoral students at HBCUs and HSIs tell me that their STEM professors are mostly Asian or European, and at the graduate and postdoctoral levels, the students are largely international. One postdoctoral scholar in mechanical engineering at an HBCU reported that the primarily international Asian faculty, doctoral students, and postdoctoral researchers at her institution referred to Black students as underintelligent. In attempts to prove Black students' inferiority, some faculty and peers would attempt to sabotage Black students' research projects. In this hostile environment, one postdoctoral scholar felt that any behavior that diverged from what these racist people deemed acceptable would reflect negatively on the entire Black race. That representation piece is key because a lot of times, some of the classes I struggled in because I didn't want to go to the professor's office hours, or I felt like the professor was unreachable. I felt like maybe I had to kind of seem strong, and maybe visiting office hours would be seen as a sign of weakness, or something like that. I just felt like, by going to their office hours, they would make me feel dumb, or they wouldn't listen to me as a person, and they would just say, "See? These Black kids can't cut it." The strain of being in this untenable position is obvious. If that's how it is in graduate schools, including some that were founded to serve Black students, how much worse is it in a university founded with profits from slave trading, or one whose students and alumni see the university as their personal fiefdom? How do some students manage to survive brutal academic climates, and what does it cost them? What can be done to change that? In Black, Brown, Bruised, How Racialized STEM Education Stifles Innovation, I ask these questions and analyze the answers. As with much research, asking one question leads to others. For instance, why do schools recruit people into disciplines whose climate regularly drives them away? It is inefficient, to say the least, for a university to train URM students only to have a large proportion of them leave without completing their degrees. What are the root causes of the lack of URM students and professionals in the STEM fields? What is the global community missing out on by tapping into only some of its human capital, namely a small, male-dominated group that skews white and Asian? What contributions can Black, Latinx, and Indigenous peoples offer the STEM disciplines that no other groups of people can? A detailed look at the book. In Black, Brown, Bruised, How Racialized STEM Education Stifles Innovation, I want you to hear the voices of scholars of color as they feel their way through a forbidding STEM educational landscape. Their moving personal accounts constitute a strong argument for doing everything possible to facilitate URM's access to some of our society's most respected professions. In Chapter 1, I outline research that suggests the overrepresentation of white men in STEM has hampered scientific advancement and stifled innovation. There's a growing recognition that homogeneous work teams are significantly less effective at solving complex problems than teams that include people of varied classes, races, genders, and cultural backgrounds. In addition, researcher bias is more pronounced in teams made up of one demographic group. For instance, medical researchers often assume that men are the only subjects needed for drug trials, which leads to overdosing or ineffective treatment in non-male groups. Car designers and engineers who test safety equipment with dummies, the height and weight of an adult male, run the risk of leaving people of all other sizes unprotected. Despite reams of evidence, the STEM enterprise continues to prop up its old boy networks and exclude everyone else. It is an inbred culture that refuses to acknowledge and be accountable for a recurring pattern of casual and blatant racial oppression. Increasing racial diversity on STEM university campuses and in STEM industries would foster greater innovation, thereby leading to less racially insensitive environments and more effective STEM products and services. Embracing diversity in gender, sexual orientation, and types of ability, as well as neurodiversity, that is, people with autism, and socioeconomic diversity, is not just a nice thing to add on to a campus culture or an R&D team. It could mean the difference between life and death. Traditional STEM culture fosters the belief that the individual is the basic societal unit and everyone has to make it on their own. It would be wiser to incorporate aspects of African, Latinx, and Indigenous cultures which value group interests more than individuals, honor the wisdom of ancestral knowledge, and seek coexistence with nature rather than trying to conquer it. Other topics in Chapter 1 include the Pan-Africanist perspective, Lat Crit, and the dangerous pseudoscience of eugenics. I also make an economic case for racial equity in STEM, which posits that if the overall educational achievement of underrepresented students was raised to that of white students, the U.S. economy would increase by $2.3 trillion by 2050, with STEM responsible for a large portion. Creating diverse and inclusive academic environments has been effective in reducing the STEM education gap. In addition, some current technologies developed without participation reinforce racial bias and discrimination. The benefits of diversifying STEM would accrue to all people, not just people of color, POC, and to the overall U.S. economy. For several reasons, I start Chapter 2 with a focus on engineering. I studied, trained, and worked as an engineer. It is a burgeoning field of study, in part because of the explosive growth of computers, computer science, and the related field of electrical engineering. Computers started as huge mainframes that occupied specially constructed rooms to keep them from overheating. Skilled operators, such as the black women in the movie Hidden Figures, were needed just to keep them running, and programmers used punch cards. As microprocessors came into existence and became smaller and more efficient, computers gradually shrank while gaining capacity. Eventually, just about every office worker had a desktop computer, used for word processing, programming, spreadsheets, and other vital business tasks. Records kept on paper in filing cabinets gave way to records kept on hard drives. With the birth of the Internet, followed by email, and then social networking, computers cemented their place in our personal and work lives. Today, a smartphone can do far more than a mainframe computer ever could, and at speeds that mainframe designers could not dream of. For better or worse, we are constantly connected to our phones, tablets, laptops, and PCs, which hold vital information, entertainment, and all the personal connections of our lives and work. Naturally, electrical engineering and computing-related professions have also boomed. Accordingly, engineering colleges and departments have expanded and hired faculty to accommodate those who want to enter these tech fields, but the peculiar institution of engineering has managed to create difficulties for eager POC who want to enter the field. Technology could be a great equalizer, but in many ways it has merely perpetuated social inequity. Engineering colleges and departments remain dominated by white men. Some Asian groups have made headway into the field as students and faculty, but otherwise these educational spaces have remained remarkably similar demographically to what they have been since engineering became a field of study. The low participation rates of URMs in other STEM fields follow the pattern of engineering. Although biology, medicine, physics, and other STEM fields may lack the extreme POC repelling qualities of engineering schools, the problems are rampant there too. Racial stereotyping of URM groups as lacking intelligence and being limited in ability persists throughout most institutions of higher education, especially in technical, math-dependent fields, despite the presence of many URM graduates in these fields. It is hard to exaggerate the weight of constant disapproval of one's very being and the denial of one's right to belong in a field of study from people in authority who are paid to teach, train, and develop talent in students. It is also difficult to know how that disapproval feels unless one has experienced it personally. Racialized trauma and racial battle fatigue take a heavy toll on members of underrepresented groups who only want the same opportunities.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?